The last time we ventured into the world of Pokemon, we took a look at Legends Arceus, a game that I felt was a step in the right direction, but was ultimately marred by poor graphics and the so-so plot. But as is tradition with the Pokemon Company and Game Freak, we barely had time to breathe before they hit us with a brand new mainline game. Those games would be Scarlet and Violet. I personally picked up Scarlet. Leading up to release, many fans, including myself, were cautiously optimistic as always. I mean, some of the Pokemon revealed look great, including the starters, which, in terms of base form at least, I think are the strongest visually since Gen 4. The gameplay also looked like it was getting a little update, with the promise of the first truly open world, mainline Pokemon game, since Legends Arceus was more of an open level type of game, you know, something similar to Mario 64. Not to mention all the little tweaks and additions that were promised to spice things up. There was plenty of reason to be hyped. But for me, there was plenty of reason to prepare for disappointment too. I mean, sure, Game Freak has been doing a little better with stuff like Legends Arceus, but it's not by much. So as always, I'm ready to go into this game with an open mind and see how it stacks up to the rest. So without further ado, let's get into it.
The game opens with the usual spiel you get from the professor, except this time it's from the head of Naranha Academy, the school you're going to be attending to learn how to be a Pokemon trainer. This then transitions into a pretty cool cutscene where you see a Pokemon called Koraidon flying around before plummeting into the sea. After seeing that cutscene, we get to control our character, who is either Florian or Juliana, depending on your gender. We then head downstairs and do the usual stuff, talking to your mum, getting to know the older mentor character Director Clavel, and meeting your rival for the game Nemona, as well as picking your starter Pokemon. You then have the obligatory first battle and catching tutorial, after which you and your rival head towards the lighthouse, when you suddenly hear a loud cry from a Pokemon. You decide to investigate and find out that it's none other than Koraidon, who washed up on a beach at the bottom of a cliff that your clumsy ass fell off. You then approach the beast and revive it with a sandwich of all fucking things, which gives it enough power to turn into a more substantial form and act as your bodyguard, escorting you through a dangerous cave. Upon exiting the cave, the Pokemon collapses, returning to the state you found it in. However, it finds the strength to walk, and Nemona suggests you go rest at the lighthouse which is nearby. Here you run into Arven, the son of Professor Sada, who appears to recognise Koraidon. He tells you a little bit about the Pokemon and after a battle, decides to give you its Pokeball, effectively making it yours. However, it can't be used in battle because it's a little too weak. After this, you explore the surrounding area a bit before finally arriving at the academy. And it's on the way to the academy building itself that you're introduced to the evil team of this game, Team Star, who you find harassing some timid girl, who you later learn is called Penny. Another thing you're introduced to at this time is a gimmick for this game, terastallizing. It's basically crystallizing or bedazzling your Pokemon, effectively making them stronger and, in some cases, completely changing their type.
Look, you guys already know how I feel about the Pokemon gimmick, so there's no point banging on about it. You guys probably already gathered that I didn't use it much and I'm not a fan of the concept. I guess it's better than, oh, let's just make the Pokemon bigger, but not really by much, you know?
Anyway, moving on, once Team Star is disposed of, you and Nemona let Director Clavel know about what just transpired before heading off to class. This is one thing I found really cool about this game. There are actual classes. The whole school theme isn't just window dressing for the sake of it. You're actually treated like and act as a student. Now, to be completely honest, I didn't bother with the lessons past a couple of them because I was more concerned with seeing what the main bulk of the game had to offer. But after doing some research, there are some great rewards for passing all of the exams and such, so hey, if you're interested, why not give it a go? Regardless, once you introduce yourself to your classmates, you get to explore the school a little, where you run into Arven once again. He goes on about some dream he has to acquire herbs that can help heal sick Pokemon. However, they're all guarded by Titan Pokemon, which, as the name suggests, are very large and very strong, and he doesn't really have the ability to take them on, so he decides to enlist your help to acquire the nutritious plants. After accepting his request, you decide to take your leave. But before you can, you receive a call from a mysterious figure that calls himself Cassiopeia. Turns out they want your help to take down Team Star for reasons, and after they hang up, Clavel approaches you and tells you to keep it down when taking phone calls. You then explore some more, running into Nemona and this region's champion, Geeta. Your rival tells you a little bit about the champion before suggesting you take on the gym challenge and reach the rank of champion. Following this conversation, you're summoned to the director's office and are introduced to Professor Sada over a video call. She lets you know that the Koraidon that you carry with you was once in her care, and that she wants you to keep it with you, and even suggests using it as a mode of transportation. You then turn in for the night and time skip to the day your adventure truly begins. The day you set off to do your independent study assignment, which involves you exploring the region of Paldea to find your treasure. After the lecture where you're told about the assignment, Nemona elaborates on what this so-called treasure is. It seems to be something valuable, a person, an experience, something you couldn't learn in the classroom and only find by going out and living. As she's explaining this to you, Arven pops up out of nowhere and the pair start to bicker about what you're going to focus on, taking on the Titans or fighting gym leaders, when all of a sudden Cassiopeia gives you a call. They remind you of your mission, so to speak, and with that, you're formally introduced to the 3 story paths of this game.
Now, me using the phrase story paths would probably insinuate multiple endings, but no. All 3 story paths are required to beat the main story because it all feeds into one singular story that can't be progressed unless you complete certain objectives in certain story paths. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I think more choice would have been welcomed. But anyway, let's take a look at these story paths and see what they have to offer.
First off, let's tackle the all too familiar gym challenge. This path involves you taking on the 8 gym leaders of this game. Katie the Sugar Bug, Brassius the Verdant Virtuoso, Rhyme the MC of RIP, God that's a cringe name, Kofu the Surging Chef, Larry the Exceptional Everyman, Tulip the Bewitching Beautician, Grusha the Sub-Zero Shredder, and Iono the Supercharged Streamer. You then battle the Elite Four for this game: Rika the Ground type user, Poppy the Steel type user, Larry who's now using Flying types for some reason, and Hassel the Dragon type user, before finally taking on the top champion Geeta. Yeah, so apparently there's more than one champion in this game. Geeta still acts as the champion of the Paldea region, but once people beat her, they can earn the rank of champion. One of the people who actually have this rank is coincidentally the focus of this chunk of the story: your rival Nemona. In a somewhat genius move, your main rival for this game isn't going on this journey alongside you or racing you to that champion spot, but is instead more of a been there, done that type of rival. She's basically playing New Game Plus. Nemona, both in appearance and battle knowledge, is very obviously a senior, which is a pretty cool dynamic and makes her stand out amongst the sea of rivals we've had before. You always get the impression she's holding back how truly strong she is, just because she wants to almost nurture you and give you someone to go on this journey alongside, even if she's technically done all there is to do. Unfortunately, she's of the overly friendly variety, which almost undercuts her status as a strong, almost veteran trainer, and instead puts her in league with weedy fucks like How and Hop. And the character never really evolves past that overly enthusiastic, ready to battle attitude. Sure, your final battle with her shows her almost disappointed that you finally surpassed her, something she only realises in defeat, but not even a second later she's back to her usual chipper self. But your rival aside, the gym challenge itself is probably the best it's ever been. Not because of the battles or anything like that, because those are all pretty much the same old song, but because of what's surrounding it. Nemona isn't the only person you run into in your quest to beat the gyms. You see, before and after each gym battle, you may run into an Elite Four member, leading to a short conversation, and this is something I wish older Pokemon games implemented better. Sure, in past Pokemon games you got to know the gym leaders and champions a little, but the Elite Four themselves, maybe minus Flint, were just random characters as far as the player was concerned. Here the Elite Four have characters that are a lot more defined. Granted, they're still characters in a Pokemon game, so their personalities aren't super complex, but it's nice to at least get to know them before you battle them. Same with the gym leaders, who in some cases you get to know before you take them on, usually as part of their gym trial or puzzle.
I think that's one thing this game does so right. The characters feel a lot more whole and complete than the characters in Sword and Shield, for example. I think we could have done with a little bit more in the way of character development for some of these guys, but I'm glad any of them got character development to begin with. Speaking of which, let's talk about Arven's part of the story, the Titan quests.
As discussed earlier, Arven's whole goal is to locate special herbs called Herba Mystica. There are 5 in total, being guarded by 5 Titans. The Stony Cliff Titan Cloth, the Open Sky Titan Bombardier, the Lurking Steel Titan Orthworm, the Quaking Earth Titan Great Tusk, and the False Dragon Titans Dondozo and Tatsugiri. If you've played Sun and Moon before, you'll know what to expect, as these are basically just this game's version of the Totem Pokemon. The incentive for beating them is pretty strong though, since once you defeat one, Arven will whip up a sandwich using its respective herb that can be fed to Koraidon, increasing its strength and abilities, giving you new ways to traverse the overworld. The Titan fights themselves, however, are pretty unremarkable. As long as you know what you're doing, you'll be fine, although if unprepared you might find them a little challenging. Something that I and many others did find quite remarkable though is Arven's story arc. You see, every time you defeat a Titan you get to know a little more about Arven. One of the things you learn is his real motivation behind hunting down these mystical herbs. As it turns out, Arven's got a Pokemon called Mabustiff that's been injured badly, and no conventional treatment seems to be aiding it. So Arven, after reading about them, came up with the idea of finding the Herba Mystica plants and using them to bring his friend back to full health.
Seeing Arven go through the struggle to bring his friend back to full health is incredibly moving, especially with a lot of the language he uses, like expressing how his partner is the only thing in this world that matters to him. It's really touching stuff. It's even more touching when you consider his shaky relationship with his mother, but more on that in a second. First, let's tackle the final story path for this game, Operation Starfall.
As mentioned earlier, Cassiopeia has enlisted your help to take down Team Star. You achieve this by taking on the 5 heads of 5 different squads. Giacomo of the Sejin squad, Mela of the Skida squad, Atticus of the Navi squad, Ortega of the Rukpa squad, and Eri of the Calf squad. To take down each squad boss you have to beat them in a battle, but to do that you have to lure them out by fighting off 30 of the Grunt's Pokemon using the auto battle feature which this game introduced, which is probably the best part of this game by the way. I mean seriously, I'm surprised it took them this long to introduce this thing. I mean, it takes out like 50% of the monotony of Pokemon. Once 30 Pokemon are beaten, the Lieutenant will come out perched on a giant bus, and you get to battle them, as well as the Pokemon controlling the bus called Reveroom. Upon victory, you treat to flashbacks of the origins of Team Star, and you get to learn more about the squad bosses, learning that they all joined Team Star because they were bullied in school, and nothing was done about it, so they decided to take matters into their own hands. This actually fits into the primary theme of this game, school life and the effects of bullying. It's a fairly on-the-nose theme, but I think it's a very important one. I don't doubt plenty of the people who played this game were bullied. I mean, come on. We're Pokemon fans. Being bullied is an unfortunately natural part of being a student, especially one who's lower down the social ladder, so to speak. And it would have been foolish for Game Freak to ignore that reality while making a game where the entire map is basically just a playground for school kids. Now, in all honesty, there's not much in the way of depth with this theme. The theme mainly starts and stops with Team Star, but it all goes hand in hand with the other half of this theme, that being general school life. Again, it's a pretty on the nose theme with you being a Naranha Academy student, and basically every other trainee you fight, and both of your rivals being students, as well as the evil team being made up of a bunch of truants who probably should be at school. That doesn't mean there isn't nuance or stuff to dissect with this theming, but with it being so tied to the main narrative, it's easy to see larger examples of it, rather than go searching for smaller examples in more obscure areas, so to speak. Examples like students who are doing or have done well like Nemona, students who are still learning and developing like yourself and the countless students you battle while exploring Paldea, and troubled students who may have extreme talents in certain fields but due to bullying and other circumstances may have been led astray like the Team Star bosses and Cassiopeia, who turns out to be none other than Penny. It's a bit of a weird twist no doubt, but it's also kind of an obvious one if you've paid like any level of attention to the dialogue. Her motive for ending Team Star is quite noble though, with her willingness to take the fall for a friend she made at a distance, rather than having them be expelled for being associated with what the school views as a bunch of troublemakers. Which, might I add, is in spite of Team Star never causing any real problems, other than the squad bosses confronting their former bullies and scaring them shitless. Regardless, a director who's been following you throughout this saga under his extremely subtle alter ego Clive decides to revoke the Academy's decision to expel the members of Team Star after hearing Penny's reasoning for both starting and later wanting to dissolve the team. He also decides to put Team Star to work, making them help him cultivate the talents of trainers at what were once the Team Star bases.
So that's all 3 chapters of the story, but you're probably wondering how they all come together.
After helping Mabostiff get back to full health, you're contacted by Professor Sada, who requests your audience at a lab, which seems to rub Arvin the wrong way. Upon arrival, your friend opens up a bit and mentions how his mum was never around and how much it sucked being the son of someone who was praised endlessly but to him was a failure of a parent. This is something he's alluded to before, but it doesn't make this revelation any less upsetting, especially when it seems like Sada doesn't even care that she hasn't seen her son in forever and only wants the both of you to come to Area Zero so you can give her a book. Despite Arvin's reservations, he forms a team comprised of yourself, Nimona and Penny to explore the great crater of Paldea. Once you arrive, you have to unlock 4 locks to enter the Professor's lab. On the way, you and your companions get to know more about each other and even encounter some strange Pokemon you've never seen before. These are Paradox Pokemon that, thanks to the Professor tinkering with a time machine, have found themselves in modern times, either from the past or future depending on which version you're playing. You eventually unlock the Professor's lab, and as you do, you're met by a second Koraidon which looks a lot scarier than yours. Your Koraidon cowers in fear, suggesting the reason it isn't back to full health despite eating the herbs is because of the trauma from fighting this meaner counterpart. But before you have time to theorize, Pokemon come flooding out of the lab. You manage to take a few out, which leads to half of the herd fleeing, which Nimona and Penny have to chase after to avoid them escaping to the surface, while Arvin takes on the rest, allowing you to enter the lab. Upon entering, you discover the Sada you knew was AI all along, and the true Professor Sada died while conducting some research in the crater. The AI professor tells you that she wants you to destroy the time machine created by the original Sada. The reason for this is that the AI believes there's a risk of Pokemon breaking through the barrier of time and leaving Area Zero, thus ruining Paldea's delicate ecosystem. You agree and place the Scarlet book the professor asked for in the time machine, leading to it shutting down only for it to boot back up again, initiating a defense protocol, which leads to the robot attacking you. After the battle, your friends storm in to see what's going on, and Arvin realizes the robot isn't the real Sada, but before he has time to process anything, the time machine's security system goes off again. The system stops all Pokeballs that don't belong to Sada from working, and then makes the AI want to battle you again, this time with the Koraidon you met earlier. You give no other option but to fight fire with fire, and you send out your own Koraidon, who finally overcomes his mental block and reaches his full potential. After you beat the AI, it returns back to normal, but comes to the realization that to stop the time machine, it must go back to the past to disable it for good. It has a short heart-to-heart with Arvin and the rest of you before leaving and accomplishing its goal. This seems to break Arvin, as he feels like he lost the last piece of the mum he never knew. Immediately following this, we're treated to a somber scene of everyone walking home, which is quickly undercut by Nimona being her usual self. You decide to get snacks, but Arvin isn't really up to it, but he eventually concedes, and you all walk off into the sunset. And with that, the credits roll while Ed Sheeran assaults our ears.
So there we have it, that's the main plot of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Despite my praise for certain elements of the story, like the use of certain characters and themes, I don't know if I can call this a good story. There's a solid foundation there, but it could have used a lot of fleshing out, and the obvious rush nature of the game bleeds into the writing, painfully so. It just feels like there's something missing, which leads to me scratching my head when I hear people say stuff like, wow, this is the best story in a Pokemon game since Gen 5. Are we playing the same game? Black and White, at least for Pokemon games, were a lot more of a dense and multi-layered experience than this game could ever be. And now we're forgetting about Sun and Moon. I know those games are kind of controversial, but their story was a lot more complete than these games.
I think most people are blinded by the ending because that's what most people seem to cite as the cherry on top to this great story, but I think it was more of a solid ending to an average narrative. Even with Arven's struggle, a large sum of this game's narrative falls flat. One singular character and their backstory doesn't make an entire 20 to 30 hour adventure. That's only 1/3 of the story. You also have Nemona's section, which isn't anything special, as well as Penny's, which, despite some obvious effort there, isn't super impactful either. Don't get me wrong, what's here is decent, but I think as a complete story, Gens 5 and 7 still have it beat. Now granted, those narratives work as well as they do, due to their respective games' very rigid and linear structure, whereas this game had to be a little more fluid to accommodate for the open world nature of it all. But I think the fact this game was rushed out is also heavily to blame for the lack of punch a lot of the progression has for me. It's no secret that Game Freak rushes his games out every year and doesn't get the time to fine tune them as much as they'd like. If you didn't realise it before during Gen 8, we definitely do now during Gen 9, especially with the uproar online around launch, with people showing off bug after bug in this game. Now I will say I think some of this stuff is blown out of proportion. I didn't see too much in the way of insane shit during gameplay. The most I encountered were minor graphical errors and frame rate drops during more demanding scenes and gameplay moments. But that still doesn't mean I'm going to go easy on the Pokemon Company for rushing this game out, because it's absolutely unacceptable for them to keep pulling shit like this. For those of you who may be ready to disregard what I have to say because I'm referencing videos of glitches on Twitter, let's completely ignore those for a second. Let's imagine they're all fake, okay? Even ignoring the glitches, there's so much else that's wrong with this game that could have been fixed with more time in the oven. You can't enter 90% of the buildings in any given town you visit. Despite more lively expressions than past games, Game Freak is still using the same tired-old animations from Gen 7. We have popping out the ass, poor level scaling that doesn't account for the take on the gyms in any order approach, and piss poor textures that would be embarrassing in an N64 game. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay is all that matters at the end of the day, but when it's apparent both through visuals and mechanics that your game is held together by the world's weakest glue due to a lack of development time, it's a fucking problem. I don't think the graphics are the most egregious out of the series, but they're not exactly great either. The Pokemon themselves look more detailed than they ever have, and the trainer models aren't half bad either, but much like Legends Arceus, the models are surrounded by bland environments and pixelated textures that bring the presentation down overall. Of course, it's a step up from Legends, but an empty Unreal Engine scene is a step up from Legends in the graphics department. On the topic of bland environments, Paldea as a region didn't really grab me much, at least in terms of visuals. Maybe it's because Game Freak still needs to learn how to convert the concept of a region into a more open world environment, but as with the story, I felt like something was missing from the region. The towns within the region are fine despite there not being much to do in them, but outside of the towns and academy, you're looking at a pretty generic open world that could have been made for any game with a cartoony or anime-esque aesthetic.
Despite that fact though, I had a fun time exploring Paldea because, once again, the Pokemon formula saves the game from the laziness trying to cannibalise it. The Pokemon formula translated into an open world style game was fun as hell. I really enjoyed running around catching Pokemon, finding items in the overworld and taking on the story paths as and when I encountered them. As I've said multiple times before, the Pokemon formula is ironclad and can make even the most mind-numbing of games like X and Sword fun, so there's no doubt that a fresh take is going to impress, especially for those who are a little more easily pleased, let's say. I think the overworld exploration was also aided by the solid soundtrack. It's definitely not my favourite in the franchise, but there's a few bangers here. Namely the Team Star Boss battle theme, as well as some wild battle themes, which is kinda surprising for me to say because I'm not usually that big on battle themes in general. But moving on from that, there's one looming question. What do I think of the roster?
To be completely honest, I'm kinda mixed on this roster. It may take some time for me to know how I definitively feel about this roster, but for now, I'm quite mixed, and kinda feel like it may be one of the weaker ones. I think there are some Pokemon that I'll grow to love more and more over time, like Lechonk, Finizen, Scovillain, Tandemaus, Cyclizar, Pawmi, Dashbun, and of course Bellibolt.
I like frogs, can you tell?
But then you have ones that suck hard like Wiglet, Reverum and Glamora. Not to mention the over-designed Paradox Pokemon.
Look, I tried to be open-minded with redesigns of old favourites like regional variants, but something in me just kind of rejects them. I don't know, something about them feels cheap to me. Also, I'm not sure if this is a nitpick or not, but some of the evolution conditions this gen are absolutely ridiculous. Take for example Ponya's new evolution, King Gambit. To evolve from a Bishop, you have to do all of this. I don't know, maybe it sounds worse on paper than it actually is, but something that's definitely just as bad as it seems on paper is evolving Gimmighoul. To evolve Gimmighoul, you have to scour the overworld and find 999 Gimmighoul coins. Who the fuck has time for that? Well, I guess at least it's somewhat of an incentive in comparison to Breath of the Wild, which just gives you a golden poop for getting all of the Korok seeds. But yeah, I'm very mixed on the roster, despite some very cool additions like the new evolutions to old Pokemon like Annihilate and Farigiraf. And that kind of sums up how I feel about this game too. While I love certain aspects like the quality of life features and the tweaks in gameplay, as well as what might be one of the best characters in the franchise in Arven, but then it's all shat on by the lack of polish and insufficient development time, which leads to certain aspects falling flat, which makes it hard to recommend supporting this game or even supporting the franchise in the future. If you really want this game, I'd say wait for a price drop, or just buy it secondhand if you must, because the effort put into this game is definitely not $60 worth. Quickly before I go, I know it's been a minute, I've been quite busy with that massive project I've been talking about all over YouTube and Twitter and shit like that, so that's why I've been away. But rest assured, I will be back soon. I'm going to try and keep semi-consistent uploads leading up to the release of that project. They may be smaller videos or smaller reviews, smaller rants and stuff like that, so please be patient. This is going to be one big massive video, even longer than the San Andreas review, so please do support when it drops. Keep an eye out and yeah, just support any way you can, and yeah, I guess that's all. I'll see you next time. Peace.